The people building the next wave of artificial intelligence are meeting at the G7 today, and Europe is making one thing clear. It does not want the future of AI to be decided entirely in Silicon Valley. That fight is happening at the same time Washington is selling a shaky Iran deal as a breakthrough, even while the facts on the ground keep telling a messier story. Good morning and welcome back to Daily. Today's news has a very recognizable pattern. The people in power want the headline before the proof. That shows up in the AI summit in France, where Western governments are talking about sovereignty while still relying on American chips, American cloud, and American companies. It shows up in the Iran deal rollout, where the White House is pushing victory language faster than it is releasing details. And it shows up again in the Middle East, where ceasefire talk is colliding with more strikes, more dead civilians, and more confusion about who actually agreed to what. We'll also cover a Russian warship firing warning shots in the English Channel, a deadly B-52 crash in California, a few domestic political fights in Washington, some ugly money politics in New York, a celebrity AI reveal that turned into a marriage confirmation, the first major World Cup shock of the tournament, and a climate story that does not get nearly enough attention. If you're getting value from this, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. The AI story at this G7 summit is bigger than a lunch meeting, even if it starts with one. Sam Altman, Demis Hassabis, and Dario Amodei are all expected in a working session in France on safe and rapid AI deployment, and they are not arriving alone. Smaller labs from Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the UK are also in the room, which tells you where the pressure is coming from. Everybody wants a seat, but not everybody wants the same rules. Europe's mood here is pretty easy to read. Officials in Brussels are talking about tech sovereignty because they are tired of watching American companies dominate the whole stack, from model development to cloud infrastructure to the chip ecosystem underneath it. That concern is not imaginary. If a country or continent cannot access frontier models on its own terms, it can be cut off from a strategic tool almost overnight. But there's another side to that coin that gets glossed over in a lot of European commentary. You do not get to spend years underinvesting in innovation, over-regulating your startups, and then act shocked when the US pulls ahead. Sovereignty is a fine slogan. The real question is whether Europe wants freedom or just a friendlier version of dependency. That tension got sharper after Anthropic reportedly pulled its most advanced models from non-American access to comply with the Trump administration national security order. Whatever you think of that decision, it was a reminder that the companies Europeans rely on are still subject to US power. For governments in Ottawa, Paris, Berlin, or Brussels, the lesson is uncomfortable but simple. If you want real autonomy, you need your own compute, your own talent pipeline, and your own capital. Canada's Mark Carney basically said the quiet part out loud on the way to the summit. Build out, diversify, don't get locked into one supplier. That's a sensible instinct. It also happens to expose the weakness of the global tech system Europe helped create by preferring rules over risk. France, of course, has been pushing this line for years. Emmanuel Macron loves the language of digital independence, and his government has even nudged civil servants away from US platforms like Zoom and Teams in favor of homegrown alternatives. That may sound symbolic, but symbols matter when they sit on top of procurement budgets. And then there is the political backdrop. Trump just signed an executive order sketching out oversight for advanced AI systems, which makes the whole conversation even more interesting. Washington is not handing out freedom, it is trying to shape the market while it still can. In other words, the people asking for checks on American dominance are not asking for a neutral internet. They are asking for a different kind of control. The biggest disconnect in today's news is the gap between what the White House is saying about Iran and what the public can actually verify. According to the AP, the administration has been sending talking points to supporters and Republicans that describe the deal as already delivering major wins. No Iranian nuclear weapon, the Strait of Hormuz back open, and the fighting in Lebanon supposedly winding down. The problem is that the actual memorandum is still secret, even from many lawmakers who are being asked to cheer for it. That is not transparency. That is a sales pitch. Trump himself has said he wants to show the deal later, maybe in a press conference, and he has also talked as if Congress will simply rubber stamp it. Except that nuclear agreements are not optional side quests for lawmakers. Congress has a real oversight role here, and pretending otherwise is the kind of constitutional shortcut Washington only seems to discover when the president likes the outcome. What makes this even messier is that the details on the ground do not match the victory lap. The White House says the Strait of Hormuz is effectively normalized, but that is a little like celebrating because a fire got put back where it was before it spread. If shipping resumes, great, but after a war, back to normal is not a triumph. It is a reset. Then there is Lebanon. White House language suggests the deal covers the war there too, but Hezbollah is not at the table in the way Washington keeps implying, and Israeli officials have already signaled they are not bound by what they have not seen. Meanwhile, Israeli artillery, drone strikes, and ground activity in southern Lebanon have continued, and people on the ground are still getting hit. That gap matters. The Israeli Air Force chief even said a much larger strike on Iran was called off last week, which shows how close the region still is to escalation. One phone call can restrain an attack for a day. It does not solve the underlying problem. Trump has also been blunt, maybe even more blunt than his aides would prefer, saying if Iran doesn't behave, the US can go back to bombing. That kind of language might play well with some voters, but it also underlines a basic truth. This is not a peace settlement in the classic sense. It is a fragile arrangement built on leverage, threats, and a lot of trust that does not actually exist. The Iranian side, naturally, is telling its own version. Tehran says Lebanon is central to the memorandum, that sanctions relief is supposed to be broader than Washington admits, and that the US is responsible if Israel violates the terms. It is a familiar pattern in these talks. Each side presents the agreement as if the other side already conceded more than it probably did. And that is where the media framing starts to batter. AP is doing what AP does best, which is reporting the mismatch between the spin and the facts. But a lot of the broader commentary around this deal has been shaped by people who already want one outcome or another. Some want a diplomatic win no matter what, some want confrontation no matter the cost. Neither camp is especially interested in a plain English description of what the deal actually says. On top of all that, the regional picture is still ugly. Gaza's death toll since the so-called ceasefire has reportedly passed 1,000. Israeli settlers have torched property in a mosque in the West Bank. Israel has approved more settlement units, and if you needed another reminder that ceasefire in this region often means something very loose, there it is. There was also a strange side story coming out of London, where a property fair was reportedly advertising homes in Israeli settlements in occupied territory. Activists were able to document it, protests followed, and arrests were made. The reporting on that event leaned heavily into the occupation angle, which is not surprising, but the larger point is hard to miss. If you are marketing contested land like a vacation brochure, do not act shocked when people call it what it is. A smaller but still serious headline today came out of the English Channel, where a Russian warship reportedly fired warning shots toward a British yacht after Britain seized a tanker that had departed Russia. That sounds almost cinematic until you remember how quickly these maritime incidents can become the first scene in something worse. The two vessels were reportedly not far apart, British patrol assets were shadowing the Russian frigate, and the whole encounter sits inside a much larger tit-for-tat pattern between NATO countries and Russia over shipping, sanctions, and wartime leverage. The bigger takeaway is that the Russia-Ukraine war is still grinding forward, and neither side appears close to a clean exit. Russia is pounding Ukrainian territory harder again, while NATO keeps tightening sanctions on Russian oil and gas. Drones have also been crossing airspace they really should not be crossing. Every one of these incidents is being treated like a manageable exception, and that's exactly how escalation becomes routine. Back in the United States, the news flow did not get any lighter. A B-52 crashed at Edwards Air Force Base in California, and all 8 people aboard were killed. That is not a political talking point. That is a devastating loss, and it should stay that way long enough for the military and the public to actually learn what happened. There were also plenty of political headlines that say a lot about how Washington works now. Federal agents questioned allies of California Governor Gavin Newsom, who says the whole thing smells like targeting. The Senate narrowly blocked a war powers resolution on Iran, which is exactly the kind of vote that tells you Congress still likes to posture about checks and balances, right up until the moment it has to use them. Trump also signed off on using the Defense Production Act to boost weapons production, which is one more sign that the post-war industrial policy crowd now includes both parties whenever missiles are involved. At the same time, there are reports of a $600 million Trump ballroom project and new scrutiny over donations from a fossil fuel founder tied to the rollback of methane rules. So yes, the government is managing world crises, but it's also still very much in the business of favors, donors, and prestige projects. And then there's the New York House primary that a left-leaning outlet is using to make a broader point about donor networks and pro-Israel money. The reporting suggests a flood of late spending is helping incumbent Adriano Espaillat against a progressive challenger, with a lot of opaque PAC money in the midst. The exact ideological spin in that piece is obvious, but the underlying issue is real enough. If your campaign depends on money that voters can't trace until after the vote, the system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Just not for the voters. Not every headline today was geopolitical and grim, though the contrast is part of the story. Tom Holland appears to have confirmed that he and Zendaya are married, and AI images were actually part of the conversation. That is a very 2026 sentence, and somehow, it still feels like we are underselling how strange this era is. A synthetic image can now fuel a rumor, force a response, and blur the line between public curiosity and manufactured nonsense in a matter of hours. Then there is sports, where Lionel Messi just rewrote another page of World Cup history with a hat trick in his 6th tournament appearance. At 38, he is still doing the kind of things that make people stop what they are watching. Even if you're not a soccer fan, it's hard not to respect that kind of longevity. Finally, today is also the World Day to combat desertification and drought, and satellite images from around the world are not exactly subtle. Lake Mead is lower than it should be. Lake Urmia has shrunk dramatically. The South Aral Sea remains one of the clearest environmental disasters on the planet. Rivers, dams, marshes, and lakes are all telling the same story. Water stress is not a future problem, it is already here. That does not mean every climate headline has to be turned into an ideological sermon. It just means that when governments treat land, water, energy, and infrastructure like afterthoughts, the bill always arrives later. Here's the short version. Europe wants more control over AI, but control is not the same thing as capability. The Iran deal is being sold as a win before the terms are public, which is usually a bad sign. Lebanon, Gaza, and the Strait of Hormuz are still unstable despite all the victory language. Russia, Ukraine, and NATO are edging through another round of maritime and military friction. And underneath all of it, the world keeps producing quieter stories about water loss, donor money, military accidents, and the strange normality of AI leaking into celebrity life. That's the day's news as it stands right now, and the next update could change the picture fast. Drop your take in the comments. Is Europe's push for AI sovereignty smart self-defense, or just a belated response to a race it already lost? If you found this useful, hit like, subscribe, and stick around for tomorrow's roundup. The story is moving quickly, and there's a lot more to unpack.